Hello my most amazing gang, hope you're doing well, you're looking well. Taylor here, taking a quick step over from Top 5 Scary. Now I'm used to only doing Top 5 lists, so this was a world of opportunity for me. It was literally twice as much scares as I've ever had to write. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the dark world of exorcisms and all the evil that surrounds it. Grab a rosary and a big cup of holy water as I walk you through the top 10 scary times priests were possessed during an exorcism. Have you ever seen something strange, paranormal you couldn't explain? I hope not. But if you have, let me know down in the comments because I do want to read about it. Number 10. George Lukins. Coming up first on our list is our oldest entry, one George Lukins, dating all the way back to the 17th century, back when there was just more demons around in the air and everybody was exorcising each other. George was possessed by an evil spirit named Yatin Demonica, causing him to behave, well, oddly. He was speaking backwards, speaking in tongues, making inhuman growls, and generally behaving like a guy who had a demon in his throat. He tried to see doctors, but found that it wasn't much help, and thus sought out the clergy, who sent 7 priests to tend to such a demon. The reverend leading them was afraid of the creature inside of George, fearing that he wasn't prepared to deal with such a demonic threat, and as such, he was accompanied by an entire group of priests to tend to Lukins. He was calm throughout the entire procedure, and they thought that they had vanquished the spirit inside of him and everything was hunky-dory, but for the rest of his life, George Lukins would complain about supernatural occurrences happening to him all the time. Perhaps you can never truly wipe the slate clean. And my friends, if you like what we do here, why not click through, spend the rest of the day watching scary, cool videos, and toss a subscribe our way. You won't regret it. Number 9. Anna Eklund. The next one was made into a movie, alongside most of the ones on this list. I didn't know there was such a market for exorcism movies, but I guess there is. This story is by no means a pleasant one, but did you really expect that from a video about exorcisms and demons? Anna's father preferred to keep things in the family, so to speak, and after repeatedly rebuking her father's illegal advances, Anna Eklund started to show strange changes in her behavior and health, although she was perfectly healthy when examined. Thus, she was taken to be exorcised. In 1912, she was exorcised for the first time. Shortly after, her father's secret lover, who was a black magic practicing witch, cursed Anna. There is so much going on in this story, and I feel like I need a lot more than a single minute to talk about it. I hate when my father's secret lover curses me. I hate when that happens. From here, Anna fell back into a state of supernatural disarray and was taken back to the convent, where her body revulsed upon being near sacred ground. She became swollen and heavy, weighing down the bed she was laying on. The priest believed this was the physical weight of the spirits inside her, and believed that the spirits inside her were the lost, damned souls of her father and his mistress. After 23 brutal days, the priests finally managed to wrestle control and free her from their torment. Number 8. Micheal Taylor. Our next entry is the case of Micheal Taylor, a once loving father who was plagued by chronic pain and depression and possibly demonic possession. He lived in the town of Ossett in England alongside his wife, their dog, and children. Micheal had suffered a severe back injury earlier in his life that led to him chronically being in extreme pain and unable to hold down a job. Prompted by a friend to try spiritual healing, Micheal befriended and soon found himself enamored with a young pastor named Marie Robinson. This infatuation would take over his life, and soon Micheal would ignore his family and was acting irrationally, violent, and according to friends, just not seeming himself. An exorcism was performed on him, lasting through the night and into the morning, with Micheal convulsing and lashing out at priests the entire time. Priests claim that Micheal had 40 demons living inside him. I was surprised there's room for anything else. Despite this, they sent him home to rest for the next session, and what happens next is a tragedy. At 9:45 the next morning, police were called to the Taylor residence to discover Micheal Taylor naked, slicked in blood, and curled up in the front lawn, screaming that he was covered in the blood of Satan. It had turned out that night, he had attacked his wife and the dog. At trial, he insisted his actions were not his own, but rather the possession of the demons inside him. He was incarcerated for only 4 years. Number 7. Gina. More than a few exorcisms on this list have served as the inspiration for big-budget Hollywood movies, but this is the only one that was broadcast on a TV channel for everybody to see. Reverend James Labar oversaw the exorcism of a young woman named Gina, who is believed to have been possessed by the devil. The Reverend was quoted as saying, "We thought it was important for people to understand that the devil does exist, and most important, that the church has a means to help." This was certainly not without its controversy. Many detractors both in the church and outside of it said that it was sensationalizing and exploitative of the young woman who, if she really was suffering from problems, mental or otherwise, she probably would have done a lot better without a camera crew pressed up against her filming her most private moments. It was described as being medieval, propping up a mental patient for the entertainment of masses on a Sunday. And in actuality, the woman was a mental patient and was undergoing treatment at the time for psychotic episodes, although her family believed her problems were supernatural in nature. In the end, the church declared the exorcism a success and said that while most of the evil had been driven out of Gina, she was still plagued by psychological problems, and in the Reverend's own words, she is up and about but not well. Surely being part of a televised exorcism had nothing to do with that. 6. Marcica Corici. What would happen when a member of the cloth gets possessed? We don't usually hear about stuff like that, like nuns and priests. Well, in the case of Marcica Corici, that's exactly what happened. She was a member of the convent, a nun living in Romania, when she was thought to have come under possession of a hostile demon that had taken up residence inside of her. She believed that she had heard the demon speaking to her at all hours. Initially, she was treated for schizophrenia, but when priests found that it wasn't enough, they decided an exorcism was in order. She was restrained after she refused to drink holy water, which makes sense. I've never tried it, but I bet it doesn't taste great, demon or no. She was bound to a cross, gagged with a towel of holy water, and kept without food or water for 3 days in the church's basement. Unsurprisingly, she would die from this. The priest who led the exorcism pleaded that he was innocent in his involvement with Marcica's death, as he was simply trying to remove spirits from her as God intended. I get where you're coming from, but isn't the point to remove the spirits so she can go on living? In the end though, her official death was ruled that it was an overdose of adrenaline after she was taken to the hospital. Number 5. Gottlebin Dittus. Gottlebin Dittus, beside having one of the most fun names a human can say, was the subject of an exorcism in the late 18th century in Germany in a small village. And yeah, I was kinda surprised that Gottlebin was a girl's name too. Miss Dittus lived a quiet life with her siblings in the family home until she started to experience paranormal activity during the dark hours of the night. Scratches across the floor appearing out of thin air, furniture being dragged around seemingly by nothing. Miss Gottlebin told a doctor as well that she was having vivid nightmares where she was visited by a demonic spirit of an old woman holding a baby in her arms, you know, normal everyday stuff. Gottlebin moved to stay with a cousin, but the paranormal activity would follow her, leading one Reverend Blumhardt to take it upon himself to free the woman of the evil energy lying dormant inside her. The exorcism was pretty brutal, even by exorcism standards, which are not nice. Reports say Gottlebin vomited sand, glass, blood, nails, and just a little bit of pea soup. During the exorcism, the spirits inside Gottlebin allegedly jumped out of her and made their way into her sister who was watching, leading the Reverend to duel the demons inside both women, although thankfully ultimately prevailing. Number 4. Clara Germana Cele. In 1906, in the town of Natal, South Africa, an orphan named Clara began to experience bizarre happenings that no one could explain. Overnight, she was speaking fluently in languages she'd never heard before, and this was a good 100 years before Duolingo even happened, so no one knew how she could know this. It was also said that she could know things about people that she shouldn't possibly, intimate secrets, very personal details. And these are both pretty odd, but it was also reported that she would levitate in the air sometimes, so, you know, that's pretty weird too. A nun at the orphanage reported that her body would turn rubbery and she would move across the ground like a snake, showcasing surefire signs of possession. A pair of priests attempted an exorcism that lasted for days. Clara would lash out at the priests and even tried to strangle one. It took 2 full days of constant bombardment, prayer, and holy water, but eventually, allegedly, Clara levitated from her bed and then fell back down and was free from the control of the spirits. Number 3. Arne Johnson. Now these last 3 are all our big budget famous exorcism cases, and kicking us off is the case of David Glatzel and Arne Johnson. If you're a big horror buff, you might recognize these two from The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. But the real case is scary enough, they barely needed to change anything for the movie. The son of the Glatzel family, David Glatzel, began to complain that he was being harassed by an old demonic man that only he could see that would threaten him. The nervous family contacted the church and eventually got in contact with the famed demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who attempted to exorcise the boy. They were successful, but one of the demons inside of David allegedly made their way into Arne Johnson, the boyfriend of David's sister. Johnson would then go on to violently attack his landlord with a pocket knife, and upon arrest, he insisted that it was the devil inside him that made him do it, and he was completely out of control of his actions. Eyewitnesses would say after this, Arne would growl gutturally and act irrationally and just wasn't himself. Could it have really been the spirit of a demon that drove him to commit such heinous crimes? I haven't actually seen the movie, but maybe they shed more light on this than that. Number 2. Annelise Michel. This case is Annelise Michel, which is made famously into the exorcism of Emily Rose, and it's not a particularly happy tale, I will warn you. Michel was suffering from severe mental health problems and was staying at a psychiatric hospital. From here, she developed a strong resistance and intolerance to any sort of Christian symbolism, convulsing upon seeing crosses, and claimed to hear voices of demons. This led her family to believe she was being possessed, who contacted priests and demanded she be exorcised. Annelise's case was famous for how long and brutal it was. Annelise was restrained and exorcised for hours on end for months. Over the span of 10 months, she was exorcised 1 to 2 times weekly for hours on end. Near the end, she stopped eating and drinking entirely. Annelise would pass from malnutrition and starvation. In the end, her death was ruled a negligent homicide, and her parents and the priests who performed it were charged for their misdeeds. And finally, number 1, Roland Doe. Well, if we're talking about famous exorcisms, it's going to be pretty difficult without mentioning maybe the most famous exorcism, the case of Roland Doe. If it doesn't immediately stand out as recognizable to you, maybe if I told you it's the basis for the film The Exorcist, you might perk up. The real case is pretty different than the film though. No pea soup, no twisted heads, but lots of demons. Young Roland Doe was an isolated boy who spent a lot of time with his aunt, who was fascinated by the occult. She gave him a Ouija board and taught him of the spirit world. When she passed, Roland began to experience all the telltale signs of possession. Strange growling, furniture around the house moving, so an exorcism seemed like it was in order. But the demons had a tight grip on Roland's soul. During the exorcism, the boy managed to escape his restraints and slash at a priest's throat with a broken bed spring. The family moved to St. Louis after red scratches that appeared to spell Louis appeared on Roland's body. From here, he was exorcised yet again by more seasoned priests, who after a brutal battle freed the boy's soul, who claimed he saw a vivid vision of Saint Michael battling Satan for control of his soul while he was asleep. By all accounts, luckily, he went on to live a fairly normal life afterwards. One wonders if he ever saw the movie. And that's all for this video, my most amazing gang. Thanks so much for watching. Check me out on Top 5 Scary if you like, and have a beautiful tomorrow.